Hi, I'm Sandy Lowry's the Good Girl Confessional podcast and Women Beyond 40 platform would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast is recorded, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung people and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge this land was never ceded. Hello, welcome back to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowry's, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is absolutely proudly part of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, a platform for women in midlife and beyond. We know that every woman has a story, and this is the place for it. Today in the confessional, I'm honoured to be chatting with an extraordinary guest. Her name is Maggie Walters, and Maggie has written her memoir called Split. How does someone survive unimaginable trauma in childhood? Well, for some people, it means the only mechanism of survival is that their personality splits and splits again, or in Maggie's case, splits many times over. For Maggie to survive the level of trauma that she did in childhood, she actually developed something called dissociative identity disorder. DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Something that Maggie knows to be true is that this has been represented pretty badly previously in film and in the media. And her memoir is a story of incredible resilience and strength, but also a story of self-acceptance. Maggie has gone on to navigate the world living with her alters, living with DID, and ultimately creating a life that is meaningful and filled with love. Please welcome to the confessional for the very first time, Maggie Walters.
Hey, how about a podcast about all the music that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up? If that got you humming a hit from the 70s and 80s, then have we got a show for you. I'm Jo Pybus, and when Sandy's not in the confessional talking to awesome chicks, she's driving a Sandman over to my place and co-hosting Alex the Seal with me and Molly, a podcast about music nostalgia. Just search for Alex the Seal on your podcast app.
Maggie, welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me.
I am super excited, and I don't often shout out to people's like book publicists, but I'm going to. A big shout out to Nicole Webb, who
absolutely
introduced us and was able to get us together, which is fantastic. So hi, Nicole. Yeah. I'm sure she will be listening. Don't you worry about that. Welcome. I am so excited to meet you and to chat with you. And, we've had like a little natter just before we started recording, and, it's evident the warmth that you have is so obvious from word go. So I'm really thrilled to be chatting with you here today.
This is going to be fun.
I think it will be. It's really exciting. So first of all, I should say congratulations on your amazing memoir, which is called Split. And it's a life shared living with multiple personality disorder. And we should say that this is also referred to as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. More commonly, I guess, these days. And I guess, first of all, I want to know, for those who are listening along, I mean, you live with this disorder and it is just a way of being, living.
Yeah.
For those that don't know a lot about it, Maggie, can you tell us a little bit about what it actually means to be living with DID?
Imagine you have a dysfunctional family. Mine just happens to be in my head, really more than anything else. I don't mean to be light about it, but that is, I'm high functioning. And so what that means is that I don't dissociate all the time anymore. As a child, I did, because that's how we survived our trauma. But as an adult, unless I get triggered, I tend to be able to, it's just their voices in my head letting me know what they think and my circumstances and what's going on.
Right.
I will say that, and look, everything I say is about my experience with MPD. And I call it MPD because that's what it was when I was diagnosed back in the dark ages. But it's my experience. It's not a professional's perspective. It's actually just my understanding.
100%. And your lived experience,
Yes.
Maggie. I mean,
Yeah.
you're the person living with it, so it makes perfect sense you'll be speaking from it,
Yeah.
from a personal experience. Um,
Sure.
the forward of your book, and this is really, I guess, something important that I really wanted to say. The forward of your book is written by Dr. George Blair West, who's a psychiatrist, but he's
Yep.
also a renowned author as well. And he
Yeah.
wrote Girl in the Green Dress. One of the things I wanted to mention that he says in the forward for our listeners who might not understand this, he said if he was asked to capture DID in one sentence, he would say it's a testimony to how the human mind really can develop superpowers and fly away. But he
Yeah.
really went to great lengths to say DID is not a mental illness. It is a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
I really just want to people, how did you feel when you read his forward, which is lovely, by the way?
It was really nice. I've had an opportunity to develop a little bit of a relationship with him as we've done a few things together, but it's like, it's just my way of life. And it's about, I'm really blessed and honored to actually have as creative a mind as I did, because if I hadn't developed my girls, my alters, I wouldn't be alive today. And I'm pretty sure, I'm like 100% sure of that, which is affirming to say that it's creative. It's not something that's, sick.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And very much a survival mechanism. So
absolutely.
absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your girls. And I love
Yes,
that you refer to your personalities are called alters, or they're known as
yes,
alters and you call them though my girls or the girls.
yeah,
I love that because I always feel like I'm a big advocate for, you know, female friendships and groups of women getting together and supporting each other. It's just that your girls live within you and they are supporting you internally all the time.
yes, yeah. Supporting is a very generous word. Some of them get really ticked off at me quite a lot, and they would prefer that I wasn't living the life that I'm living. But I had someone ask me once, "Do you see yourself as a superhero because you've managed to survive this?" And I can honestly say, no, I don't. But my alters are my superheroes. And yes, they all happen to be girls, which is a little bit unique for someone with alters. But um, they went through a lot, that is hard for someone who's neurotypical to even begin to imagine. So they're my superheroes, and I'm pretty honored to have them in my life, even though they are brats sometimes.
I guess I'm fascinated by that, by the girls and how they have come into being to help all of you survive, and especially to help you survive. So, are they different ages? Are they different? I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
they're very different personality archetypes. Of course,
yeah,
they are,
yeah.
um, which would make perfect sense. But are they different ages?
Yes, they are. And one of the things to understand about the development of alters is that it becoming MPD usually only happens with children. There's not really any known cases of as adults because a child's mind is got a lot of plasticity in it and it's very malleable. So creative alternative for escaping bad situations is still really commonly done. For me, and the way my system became, so Annie is my primary internal alter, and she basically is a system administrator. She manages all the other girls. My alters were created to um, experience different situations, and none of them have really grown up. I say that, yeah, okay. Try that again. My alters were created to experience different circumstances, and those were at different ages. So there's younger girls. There's a particular chapter in the book called Working Girl where I try to give an overview of the different ages and the different spectrums and the way the girls were. So these girls were all created to handle all this trauma. I There are a couple of the girls who have older versions of themselves. And in fact, and this is something that is really fresh for me in my own therapy, is that I'm learning is that they actually as a child, held some pretty intense emotions. And so as a child, what they did is they couldn't handle it anymore as Annie's body kept growing up, our body kept growing up. And so they kind of spun off older versions of themselves that are now older. But for the bulk, most of the girls are between the ages of, say, 3 and 12. There's a few that are older, but they grew up and then they kind of stuck at that age. And then I've got a couple of older ones as well.
Yeah, wow. And so when they talk to you, because
Yeah,
they do talk to you,
yeah, they
so
do.
when you hear their voices, of course, you hear the voices of exactly who they are, so that age. So sometimes
Yes.
do you sometimes hear like a 3-year-old talking to you?
Oh, yeah. And look, let's take it to the next step and go. Not only do I hear a 3-year-old, I see a 3-year-old
Wow.
because they have their own complete unique body, look, feel, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, they live in a house in my head.
Mhm.
Everybody who is probably the one major common thing with everybody who's multiple is that there's a structure that their world is built around. Mine is a house. It's a bit ramshackled and strange, but it is a house. And so they all have their own bedrooms and their own places in the house that they live in. And a lot of the little ones don't engage with me, but the older ones, Annie especially, she sits at the front window of the house and she's constantly looking out onto my world and going, yeah, you screwed that up again, didn't you? That sort of stuff. So,
Okay, so I actually am so glad you talked about Annie. I really wanted to ask you about Annie because I know that she's your primary alter. And
yeah.
how closely do you and Annie exist on a daily basis? Because does she talk to you all the time? Is she just always there?
Yes, she is. She's constantly there. And sometimes it's just a feeling, but it's like she's just like my second layer of skin in many ways. When you read the book, you you actually probably can't tell voice wise that there is a difference between the part that she wrote and the part that I wrote. But she's there underneath it all, and she's constantly talking to me. She basically stopped functioning when I got intimately involved with my partner. And she just couldn't handle it anymore because she felt like she was betraying the girls. So she disappeared, and then I got shoved back out. But sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
No, I was just talking about how closely you and Annie live your daily lives
Yeah,
together, very
yeah.
much together. Yeah.
So now we do. So we
Mm,
coexist now. When the body was small, it was all Annie. I was hidden away. I had something happen when I was 3 years old. I got slapped across the face, and I disappeared. And Annie came out. And so she basically existed until I met my partner, and that became a very physical relationship. And she suddenly realized that by any sort of physical intimacy was a betrayal of the girls, and so she disappeared. Then a few years later, she came back, and now we coexist. And we talk about things like parenting. She lets me know what she thinks about my parenting skills or lack thereof. Um, we talk about my friends. We talk about the things I do socially. She is a writer just like I am and is very engaged in that process with me. So she is right under the skin. She's there, but she doesn't control it. I get to control my days, if that makes
yeah.
any sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And
Oh, good.
it does make sense. And I guess I'm interested too then on how Annie must be like you must be so proud of this book and this memoir, which I imagine would have taken quite a monumental effort to write, to retrace things and to have to
Yeah,
revisit things and to discuss
yeah,
trauma. Um, but Annie must be equally as proud of this as well. Or how does she feel about it? I shouldn't make that assumption. How does Annie feel about
yeah.
the book?
Without giving too much away,
Mm,
there was something that happened where she felt completely betrayed by me,
right.
and has been very negative about the process of writing the book because she feels like I've betrayed her with a lot of things, not what we're sharing, but just the way we've gone about doing it. I like to say, in my epilogue, I talk about how I really hope that Annie now sees that this book is as much for her as it is for anybody, as for the rest of us. I think that's happening. Um, but she had to deal with so much crap, and it was so hard for her. She was the one who had to see all the abuse. So she's actually quite depressed. She's when she comes out and talks to my therapist, the whole physical demeanor, it's very dour, it's very dark. And she really has a very negative perspective on life, relationships, people, and all sorts of stuff because her trust has been so betrayed. And I get that. So managing that is really hard. And I can't say that she sees this book as positive a thing as I wish she would. I do have an alter. Look, she's not mentioned in the book, but I talk about her. Her name is Angie, who she sees talking about the book and writing the book as a real healing mechanism. And so she probably owns a lot more of that hope and that purpose than Annie does. She's got her life sucks actually. Yeah,
Well, she's dealt with a lot,
she
and
has.
Annie's
And
dealt with a lot.
while it's hard for her, I respect that immensely.
Mm,
You know?
yeah, absolutely. And I guess I wanted to ask too, so how old, I mean, look, this is all in the book. I don't want to give too much away, and I want people to read the book.
Yeah.
And we will make sure we put in the show notes where everyone can get this book. It's
There
amazing.
you go. Yeah.
And full disclosure, as I said to you, I am reading the book. I haven't finished the book because it came to me so late in the piece, but I am
Yeah.
really, really loving it. And so there's things I know, but I'm still going to ask because our listeners will not.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you were diagnosed, and what was that like? What was that feeling like when they first posed this to you, that this is what we think is going on?
Okay. So here's the funky part. I actually wasn't diagnosed. It was Annie that was diagnosed.
Wow. Okay. So
And
we
this
can
is
say,
one of those things for a neurotypical brain.
yeah,
I understand that it was us.
sure.
And it was my body. However, had disappeared at that point.
Yeah.
Annie had actually forgotten she was multiple because she'd left home and she was just living a very dysfunctional life. So she went to get therapy. And as the more she spent time, we call him number 2 in the book because I have had 4 therapists in my life. And the more she spent time with him, the more she trusted. And so she discovered she was multiple. So she never, it was never me. The funny part is that when Annie left and I got forced back out, I immediately knew I was multiple. There was no discovery. It was like I had an entire painting put in front of me of what my life was, and I had to absorb it within about 30 seconds, and it was like, okay,
Wow.
I'm multiple. Yeah. So that side of it was kind of funky, but it's all I've ever known.
Yeah.
I had someone ask me, would you ever want to not have these voices in your head? And it would be kind of boring, I think, to just be dealing with your own voice all the time. But that's because I know nothing else.
And I guess for some of us, we hear maybe what we think is like our gut instinct, if you like. It's like
Yes.
our consciousness talking to ourselves. But for
Yeah.
you, these are genuine alters. I think I read somewhere you were talking about, and I've read a few articles where people have interviewed you.
Yeah.
And you talk about, this little girl who's over on a swing set all by herself, and so that
Yes.
you see her vividly. What's that like? Like to be just going about your day and doing all the things that you do? You're a mum to teenage boys, and you're working, and you've got a book launch, and it's all happening. And you look across and you see one of your olders. I guess I'm trying to understand, what does that feel like, or it's just so normal now?
It's very normal. It's not invasive. What gets invasive and causes me problems or challenges during the day is when I get triggered.
Right.
And, there are people who say, well, you need to learn to manage your triggers. I understand that to a perspective. But the other side of that is trauma survivors, we never know what's going to trigger us. We can have a general idea, and there's a lot of things we do to take care of ourselves. Like I will always sit with my back to a wall when I go to a restaurant. I need to be able to see the exit because there's a lot of hypervigilance involved with the girls. If I go to the movie with my family or with friends, I always have to sit on the edge. Anywhere I go that's a theater type setting, I need to sit on the edge so I know I can get out of there really quickly if I'm feeling uncomfortable. I can do those things, but it still doesn't stop the triggers happening that cause a lot of grief and a lot of problems. Those are the ones that are really difficult. Living with them in my head on a day-to-day basis and seeing them there, it feels normal to me, which is probably kind of weird, but it feels very normal to me. It feels right. And they belong where they are. I don't experience a lot of emotions. I probably feel emotions on a scale of 1 to 10. a 1 to 2, maybe a 3 at times. But there are alters who, like, I call her, all of my alters in the book have pseudonyms. And this one doesn't happen to be in this book. She'll be in the next book. Angry Woman. An angry girl and angry woman, which are the two sides of the one, they hold volatile emotions. And I've been coming to terms with that. And she gets very angry at very socially justice or unfair circumstances that we go through. And then suddenly I'm watching myself lash out. So it's not hard for me to have the girls in my head. What's harder is actually when they come out and I have to deal with the ramifications of that.
Yeah, and especially as you say, because you're so high functioning, as you said, people wouldn't necessarily know
No.
that this is that you live with alters. They wouldn't know that, and so what they're witnessing, I guess, if say angry girl or angry woman might come out, that they're assuming that is you, and in actual fact, it's actually an alter.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Wow.
I had a situation where I was, in fact, it was right before the launch of the book. I was quite sick, and I knew, because we live in regional New South Wales, getting in to see my doctor to get some antibiotics or something was going to be next to impossible. So I went to the critical care clinic. I can't wear a mask. And so during COVID, it was really hard. But I had a circumstance happen where I went in and I saw the sign that said, tell us, what you're feeling. And if you need to wear a mask. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't wear a mask, but this is how I'm feeling. They said, well, we won't see you then. And that triggered Angry Woman because of the injustice in that, because they didn't even try to understand what was going on. And she literally went across each of the 3 screens that were there and coughed across the counters. And
Oh,
it was
wow,
like,
right.
I felt ashamed immediately as I watched this happening. I can tell you, I have been banned from that clinic because I was seen as a threat. And it was like, it's just because people didn't take the time to understand that I can't wear. I even have a note on me from my therapist that says why I can't wear a mask. And they said, that doesn't matter. You have to, or get out of here. And it was like, lost it.
Wow.
So those things probably happen once in a while, not too often. I can sometimes feel them building up, but that one in particular that blindsided me. I didn't expect that. So that's when it gets hard for living with the girls. Yeah, 90% of the time, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, wow. And I'm just going to put it out there and say I can understand how she feels, Angry Woman, because I do think, like, I was raised by a pretty tough left-wing disabled mother who
Okay.
and so social justice runs in our veins, but I get it, and I do think that there is this real thing, and not in any way am I saying that DID is a disability, but it is that thing of sometimes people can't wear a mask or they can't do certain things for a very real reason, whether that's psychologically or physically, and the medical system is not built to actually understand, anything that's left of center. They're like, forget it, they just don't. So I understand, Angry Woman. I understand.
Well, good. I'm glad you do. She appreciates that, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, good. I hope she does. I get it. And look,
see, and that's a really good example of part of the healing process, because the more that I can talk about it, not only it gives them healing to hear you actually say that. Maybe she won't be quite so angry. I don't know that, but it's like she's getting some affirmation that the inequality that she felt and the lack of being heard that she felt was affirmed. So I hope that when I talk about this stuff, that happens for them. And I also have to say, I hope that other people out there who listen to this, who are having the same struggles, whether it's MPD or just complex trauma, that they understand that they need to be heard, and that can be healing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things about my platform, and one of the reasons I started it, was this feeling that a lot of women, once they hit midlife and beyond, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, some of our guests have been in their 80s, they're brilliant.
That's cool.
It is very cool. But I think one of the biggest struggles with women in general is that we don't feel heard. And I think, right, and so not having a voice, and I love Kamala Harris, by the way. I'm putting it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But her "I'm speaking," moment was so beautiful.
That's great.
And in some ways, that's I'm sure maybe that angry girl or angry woman would have heard Carmela that day and went, yes, like, right? Because
I hope so.
I hope so, because I think we all want to be heard, right? I mean, we want to be heard, but also I think it's, as all human beings, we're all complex and we all want to be understood to some degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I have been, there's sometimes people go, you're so honest and so transparent about what happened to you. And I'm going, the more transparent I am when I'm coming from a position of strength, the more people will be informed, and the more those stereotypes and those stigmas around the struggles that we have, they'll be just blown away, and people can start caring about each other a lot more. I'm a real one for kindness. Let's stand up and let's be kind,
Absolutely. I I love that you said that. It's beautiful. And it's true.
Thank you.
If there was more kindness
It
in the
is,
world.
it's like this world had a little bit more kindness rather than judgment. Yeah, it'd be a lot better place. There'd be a lot less need for therapists.
That's very
quite
true.
frankly,
Yeah, no, that's very true. I guess we should probably point this out. I mean, we're skirting around the edges of this, but DID, or multiple personality disorder, happens because of extreme trauma. This is not, a lot of people go through trauma, and that trauma is very real, but there are certain levels of trauma where multiple personality disorder, or DID, happens to actually help. It's a survival mechanism, as we've talked about before.
Yeah.
So obviously in your case, how many alters do you have? How many alters do you live with?
I think I probably have close to 40.
Okay.
Which was, in some cases, is actually probably not that many, in all honesty. I regularly interact with probably 15 of those. Some of them sit on the edges. They're so wrapped up in their own trauma. So some of the little girls, I call it like they're on a hamster wheel, that they're just so involved in their own trauma that actually reaching them and getting them to see that the world could be different is going to be next to impossible. So my therapist and I tend to work on the relationships where I do interact with my girls more often, and how can having those relationships with them strengthen the system as a whole. About 40 that I'm aware of. I mean, isn't that the whole point of DID, is that they've taken all this crap away from me so that I don't have to deal with it. There is a locked attic door in my house, in my head, and I am fairly sure that there's stuff behind that door and altars behind that door that I will never know about. And that's okay. It makes me sad, but that's okay, because I just, I'm old enough now that I don't need to deal with that. Let's just deal with what's in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the reason, I guess, that you're having this life and that you can function so well is because those altars are very much saying, this is guarded now. This is off limits for you.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Wow. I'm kind of really fascinated by it. Have you met other people with multiple personality disorder, and what has that been like if you've met them?
Okay, yes, I have. Annie used to be involved with a group of people who are multiple, and I think she enjoyed that, but I don't know too much about it. Okay. Today, I have now, since the book has come out, I've started interacting with people who are DID, and I find them to be so brave. I've had a few contact me online, and that's been great. But I think of these two women who I met. I was doing a talk in the Blue Mountains, and there are three conditions really that make up provide the fertile ground for someone to become multiple. And that is that it's parental or close trauma, betrayal sort of stuff. It's the intensity of it. It's an inability to escape those circumstances. And so what happened at this talk was I had actually forgot to mention about the fact that a child feels like they can't escape. And that's one of the conditions. And this woman at the end in the Q&A session, she was in the back and she stood up, and you could tell she was nervous as all get out. And she said, I just want to say that there's something you forgot, and that's about how they can't escape their circumstances. And the reason I know that is because I'm DID. And I was just, she was so brave. And I was so proud of her.
Yeah.
And I told her so afterwards. I said, you keep it up, girl. You are amazing. And
Wow.
it really, it was affirming to me that my transparency in my life helps other people. I had someone else at the very same talk. I was at the book signing table, and she came up to me and she told me her name, and she leaned over and she said, "I haven't come out of the closet yet." And I was just like, "Oh, well, you know what? You take care of yourself, sweetheart, and you've got to do what works best for you." And so it's things like that that are really affirming and remind us that we're all just people who need to be loved and cared for.
I've got goosebumps. So, like, this is quite extraordinary as well. Like, I love that I haven't come out of the closet yet. Because it kind of speaks to, right? It kind of speaks
Yeah,
to like yes, it's extraordinarily brave, but won't it be beautiful one day when we can live in a world where we can all just go, "This is who I am,"
yeah,
whatever that may be,
yeah.
there's some acceptance and kindness and love about it. Um, but I do think that. Do you think there's a lot of misconception around it? Is that why people are afraid to come forward in their daily lives to say, "This is what I'm living with"?
I think there's a huge amount of misconception. I was at a talk where, and it's funny, the guy that I was in conversation with, fabulous guy, and he actually read that passage that you were talking about and talked about, it's a creative coping mechanism. It's not a mental disorder.
Mm,
In the Q&A section at the end, there was a guy sitting there, and he basically looked straight at me and he said, "I want to ask a question." He said, "You have talked about how, it's this creative coping mechanism." And then he leaned forward, he said, "But it's really a mental illness, isn't it?" And I went, "Okay." I could feel the armor starting to go
oh,
on. And
yeah,
I
of
said, and
course.
I tried to use, I said, there's a difference between something that's trauma based and something that's genetic or biological. And then he leaned forward again. He goes, "Yeah, but it's still a mental illness." And I was like, the guy who I was in conversation with, he was fabulous because he suddenly realized this guy just wanted to peg me. And he
Yeah,
moved the conversation on and did others. But I was like, I was talking to people afterwards and I was like, that's the sort of guy that you're trying to expose. You're trying to expose this sort of perspective that says that if you're anything left of what I deem as normal, then you're mentally ill. And it's like, "God, come on, give me a break." I I initially, I have to say, was very overwhelmed by that.
yeah,
But as the next day went on, I went, "You know what? I'm actually going to own this. And every time I'm given an opportunity, I'm going to use this guy as an example of how we need to change the system and not let it get the better of us." Those are the people that I really want to talk to. And I'm starting to get the confidence to be able to go, "You're wrong,
yeah.
just be nice, be
Yeah,
kind,
but
be
also too,
thoughtful."
like, psychiatrists are saying it isn't a mental illness, it's
No.
right? I think, I guess, that annoys me that people, especially when someone had read that passage already and had made it very clear
Yeah.
that it isn't a mental illness, so it's almost like I reckon some people just like to poke the bear, Maggie, don't you? I think some people just like to ruffle feathers and
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
for no good
It's
reason, for no good
Yeah.
reason,
But, he's an example of the fact that, so if he's out there,
Yeah,
there's a lot of other people that are out there that
absolutely.
have a narrative that either out of naivete or just they haven't paid attention, it's not on their radar, or they're determined because either they've got something in their history that makes them uncomfortable, who knows why.
Mm,
But those are the sort of people that I hope will be challenged by this book. Because and I think Blair West said it in the foreword, that someone with NPD, unless they're actually willing to trust you and talk to you about it, you probably never know that they were. We're just really good at hiding things.
yeah, right. And I think people, I mean, I guess for me, it's been, um, incredible to kind of learn more about it, like, because you've spoken up, because you've written your memoir.
Yeah.
And many years ago, I remember reading a book called When Rabbit Howls, and
Yes.
right, I read that book at a time in my life, which was really fascinating for me because I'd been a survivor of child abuse
Yep.
and had, like, years later finally went and got some counseling and was talking to this lovely counselor therapist who said to me, "Do you realize when you talk about yourself as a child, you talk about that person as a third person. And
Yeah.
I kept referring to her as her or she. And I
Yeah.
didn't actually ever realize I'd done that. But every time I talked about myself as a child, I was talking about her, she. And I said to her, "Oh, yeah, oh my God, like maybe am I like mentally unwell? Like what is wrong with me?" And she said to me, "Not at all. It makes you mentally really well."
Yeah.
And so she was so great because she said to me, that's you've disassociated yourself a little bit from her, that child who is you. Like I know consciously, of course it's me. And now I talk
Yeah.
about me in the first person, um, but she said it was because you were able to do that, you could actually get on with your life. And it was a coping mechanism for me.
Yeah.
It was definitely
Absolutely.
a survival
Isn't the
strategy.
brain an amazing thing?
It really is.
It's like, so dissociating is a way of protecting yourself. And it's just
Absolutely.
like, it's
Yeah.
wonderful.
So I found that out I was like in my early 20s, and what had happened is that
Wow.
I'd had a child, and I had him quite young. I was like 21. But when I had him, he probably hit like 2 or 3, and all of a sudden it was like the floodgates started opening and
Yeah.
memories were coming out and things were coming out, and I was like, "Oh boy,
Yeah.
I don't know if I like this. This is not good." Uh,
Yeah.
but it was good because I actually hit it head on, and I went and saw someone and really started to talk through these things. And while that was a difficult journey, it was an important journey. Um,
Absolutely.
but there are gaps in my memory, of course, that I don't know. There are certain times in my life I have absolutely no memory of and may never have, and I'm fine with that. Like I just say, like there's a therapist who said to me, "Well, maybe that's not a bad thing, and maybe you don't need to know it."
You
Right?
bet. You bet.
That's it, and so we go on. But for you, it obviously so much more extreme, and not that I want to disregard anybody's
Yeah.
trauma. I don't want to do that at all, but it is extreme trauma generally, and
You're
as you
actually
say,
breaking up quite a lot right
oh,
now.
can you hear me
I
now?
don't know if that's gonna. Yeah, that's better. You might want
Is
to
that
try
better?
saying that question again. Start from
Okay.
the beginning because it
No,
was
that's
breaking
good.
up.
Thank you for letting me know. And I'll make a note of that because we can edit that bit out.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I don't want to discredit anybody's trauma, but as you say, multiple personality disorder (DID) happens when there's a perfect set of circumstances,
Yeah.
terrible circumstances, but things have to happen for that to happen. And one of them, as you say, is not being able to escape. And I'm fascinated that now you say this comes into your life even now of not, you need to see the exits.
Yeah.
You need to be able to
Yeah.
get out.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things of being multiple, and I suppose it's probably how I stay in control more. And it's so those childhood fears that my alters had, I still carry them, but I have to manage them. And that's why I go to therapy, is because my therapist helps me manage them. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. How do you go? I'm just thinking to myself then, how do you go on a plane? How do you cope flying and things like that? Is that more difficult?
Um, yes, it is. And it's really hard when you're trying to do a book tour and you're going, I need to fly down to Melbourne and do a book tour there. And I'm going, I just can't imagine how I would fly on a plane. Because that being said, I have flown before, but the older I get and the more I start to understand how my system has been put together, I think I'm becoming more aware of their fears. So what would have, like when I immigrated to Australia from America, I mean, I had to fly here. It's not like I came on a boat. So I flew here. And I was uncomfortable the whole time. But now I'm much more aware because I've been doing this work and this therapy to understand why. And I'm like, well, crap, I really don't want to fly on a plane. So I don't know how the hell I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out at some point.
Oh, well,
It's the
yeah.
ups and downs of my life, and I just enjoy what I've got.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I think, yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to when you do get on that plane and come to Melbourne. Hopefully we'll meet in person, which will be fab.
That would be lovely. I've got a few things I'd like to do there,
Yeah.
and a few people. Yeah, so it'd be lovely. It'd be great. I'll make sure and
Yeah.
let you know.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Hey, I know that now, I mean, working on, tell us a little bit quickly about, before I go on to your next big venture, which is really exciting. But I just want to know how, I mean, I know this because I've read it, but for those that don't know, how did Split come about? Like, how did you start working on this memoir? Because it wasn't starting out as a memoir, was it?
No, it wasn't. So both Annie and I, we've always enjoyed writing, but it's more been just journal based and things like that. And I decided that I wanted to get more into writing, and I was listening to a radio conversation one day with a local, very well-known author, and they were talking about Byron Writers Festival doing the set of workshops for people with suicidality, and I went, oh, I want to do this because it's all about writing and getting it all out there. And so I got in. It was because it was by interview, and I worked with the two most wonderful authors, and started getting a lot of stuff out. I didn't tell anybody in that group that I was multiple, but I got a lot of trauma out, which was great. After that, I decided I wanted to do more courses, and more courses. So I took something called the Year of the Novel through Byron Writers Festival, and was paired, actually. The teacher was one of the ladies from that workshop. And I got about halfway through this workshop and I realized the character for the novel that I wanted to write, I wasn't jiving with her very well. And I needed to do something else. So I thought, I know that she's based on my history a little bit, not the MPD, but just the trauma. So I thought, I'm just going to write some memoir stuff and let's see if I can get a better perspective and understanding of who she is. Oh my goodness. The floodgates opened and I just started writing and it just wouldn't stop and it was fabulous. And I remember sharing it with my writing group and I was terrified and they were so affirming and just started getting lots and lots of positive feedback. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll ditch the novel for a while and now we'll move on to the memoir.
And I'm so grateful, and I think everyone is, that you did that, because oh my God, look, it's almost like, as I said, unfortunately, when I received it so late, but I'm telling you now, it's really difficult to put it down.
Thank you.
Difficult to put it down. And you can tell, I can tell that you write from the heart. And as you say, like, it's difficult to know, I guess, what parts are Annie in there, like when you're just reading, and what parts are you. But I think, how beautiful that she was there along with this ride with you, even though she might struggle a little bit with it.
Yeah,
kind of really beautiful.
Yeah, I do hope. And look, I do. I think it's pretty healing for her as well. Yeah, she's watching with a skeptical eye, but I think she gets that where we're going with this is actually all about our healing process, but also about changing perspectives. That she got judged and had so much bigotry placed on her as a young adult because she was seen as left of center and kind of weird, and actually called psychotic at one point. So I being able to do this, I think, is very healing for her as well.
When this is just, I've just thought of this just then, I don't know, but when when you started your journey speaking, well, Annie did, starting speaking with therapists, was there ever a fear from any of the alters that if we go to therapy, we might cease to exist? We might, what will happen to us? Was there ever a fear from any of the alters? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Nobody's asked me that before.
Oh, I just thought of it
No,
then.
that's good. No, I don't think there is. I mean, I know that there is this whole concept of integration that's very old school, quite honestly. It's no more, you don't talk about integration anymore. You talk about the system working together. And that's why I call us a dysfunctional family. There have been alters that have disappeared, but it's kind of like they've disappeared because their purpose is done. And I still don't quite understand it, and nor does my current therapist. So I should say that I had 4 therapists. Number 1 and number 3 did not get MPD at all. So my first therapist, it wasn't about anything to do with MPD. Number 2 was actually he specialized in it. And I've been very fortunate that number 4, while he initially had only had some cursory exposure to MPD, he was open to learning about it, which made it a growth process for both of us. But there is no need at all for us to integrate. And I have to say that sometimes to Annie, to remind her that all of our lives would be a lot better if we work together a little bit more. Yeah, but she needs to hear that.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, actually. It just does, if you can all get along, if you can all, as you say, it's about communication, I'm guessing, like good communication, healthy communication.
And it's funny because there have been some people who've looked at me and they said, the way you deal with your alters is how we deal with our external families. And I'm like
Right.
going, there is so many ways in what I go through internally actually is very relatable to people who live neurotypical lives. It's just on the outside, not on the inside.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I'm just like, to me, this seems perfectly relatable because we all have to deal with personalities and people. We just do outside
Yeah,
of
that's
outside of
exactly
ourselves.
right.
It's just yours are
Yeah,
all there, right?
yeah,
And then on top of that, the added layer of that is you guys are like all your alters, all the girls, you're all living together. But then you collectively have to deal with the external, right? You have to deal with
yeah,
people
yeah.
and personalities and stuff.
Yes.
So it's
There's
very layered.
it's very late. So there's a story that I relate in the book, and I tell this quite readily, because it's funny, but it is also shows how the girls interlace themselves with my life. I When I go to see my therapist, I always stop and I get a coffee for him, and I get a coffee for me. It's just kind of the thing I do, just to say thank you for him being in my life. And I was picking up these coffees this one day, and I was waiting for mine. And this guy walked in who had on a really tight shirt and really tight pants and was really buff. And so I have an alter who learned how to deal with the trauma by becoming compliant and by actually enjoying it. And she saw him, and basically she was started saying all this stuff in my head, and I was getting really uncomfortable. She'd like to jump in his pants and all that sort of stuff. And I just kept looking down. I was like, I just cannot handle this. Would you just shut up? And I looked up, and he was staring at me like I was the weirdest person in the world. And I was like, oh crud, did I actually just really say that or not? And I was so glad that my coffees came up at that point, and I just grabbed them and I left.
Okay,
So
see ya.
there, it's like they can be quite interlaced in my life at times. That one was particularly embarrassing, but that's okay. It is funny. It was horrifying and it's shame ridden, but the more I tell it, the more funny it becomes. And it's easier then for people to understand how I interact with my alters.
Well, you never know, Maggie. Maybe Buff Guy might hear this story one day and he'll say, I remember that.
You never know. And you go, that was the chick. She's just really weird.
Okay, now I get it.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. I
I'm
really,
glad you're laughing.
I am laughing. I think you're brilliant, Maggie.
Look, every time I talk about this stuff, I always try to find something that's going to be that helps people to laugh, because it is such a serious issue.
Yeah.
Not only is it about complex trauma and abuse, but just how we deal with it. And it's like people get really nervous and really fearful. And I want to just say, this is my life and it's okay. Look at me now. I'm doing all right. I'm moving on. I've got this book. It's fabulous. And, I'm not fragile.
Oh, you're amazing. And I think, as I said, this podcast is really about just having a chat with,
Yeah.
meeting.
We've been doing that.
We've been doing that. Meeting awesome women and just chatting. And
where's the coffee? No, where's the red wine?
I know. Where's the wine? Where's the
It's a
gin,
little bit
Maggie?
too early in the morning for that, but
Gin,
that's
I don't know.
okay.
Yeah, it is. That's always a sad thing. Do you know, when I started this podcast, I will say, when I first launched into it, one of the things was the guests and I would drink gin or whatever they chose to drink. I very quickly realised in this conversational setting, maybe that wasn't the wisest choice. And actually, 2 of the podcasts, we might have got so tipsy that we had to re-record. So I went, no, that's not a good idea.
I love it. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, you're funny. I like that.
And years later, this podcast would come out and it was Drunk Women Solving Crimes. It wasn't my podcast, but I heard it. When I've heard it the first time, I laughed so hard and I thought that's what I should have done. Just
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, very funny, but oh dear. Hey, I'm super excited that you have got a new project that's underway, which is, of course, a new manuscript, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
I want to jump into it and find out, because it's basically, so you are mum to 3 teenagers. That's no mean feat, let me tell you, because I've raised 3 kids myself. And but you, your new manuscript is talking about your kids and how they came into your life. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so first of all, I'll correct you. They're actually young adults. They're 17, 19, and 21.
They're still kids.
Yeah, and they're adopted from the Philippines. They're my gorgeous children. I just love them to death, even though they're pains in the ass. Um, and so what I did, my working title for the book is called Fractured Motherhood. Um, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to use something really positive, um, which was our adoption, the fact that we were blessed with these three children. But I wanted to weave around that because I often ask myself, I'm going, how in the world did I end up with three kids that are actually okay? With their own trauma that they've got, having lost their birth mothers, but also the fact that I come from a traumatized history. How have I not revisited that on them? And so that's the question that I explore. So I am currently in the midst of, I've got the adoption story written, and I've got a lot of sections about my history and how I came to adopt and the struggles that I've had with my parenting. But I'm also putting together the history of my mother, because one of the things that I have had to come to terms with is understanding there's a really good chance that she was probably abused as a child. I know that in her marriage, it was an abusive relationship with my father. So I'm trying to write that, which is not proving easy, this is another good example. Angry Woman is not happy about this because she thinks that in writing this, I'm actually going to be letting go and going to be trying to justify my mother's way of treating me rather than being angry at her all the time, which is all Angry Woman's ever known, an angry girl has ever known. So I am feeling the ramifications of that a lot right now as I'm trying to write this stuff. But I don't need to forgive my mother. However, I do think that forgiveness goes a long way towards healing. And so while my job with this book is not to justify what she's done, is the question that I ask myself, is in my ability to forgive her because of what she was raised in, making me a better parent? So it's still early stages. I haven't quite got the first draft done yet. I'm hoping to get the first draft done by the middle of the year. I'm putting pressure on myself to get it out there in the public by the middle of next year. I think I found the right mentor to get me through my first draft, the developmental side of the editing process. And yeah, it's really great that you asked, because the more I talk about it, I was like, oh, this is just not going to work. And I wanted to keep the MPD out of it, but I've realized I can't. If I've written Split, people who go back and if they read the second one, they're going to go, hang on, she's multiple. Why isn't this a part of the storyline? So it's not a major part of the storyline, but it's certainly there.
Well, I mean, I'm fascinated because, there is the themes of generational trauma, the themes of how we respond and react in motherhood as people who have lived through trauma.
Yes.
So I'm quite fascinated by that.
Yeah, you'd be very well aware of that.
Yeah. I've had to question myself a lot, like as we do as mothers, to sort of say, wow, how did I, and, I feel like sometimes I've kind of stuffed up and I've gone, oh my God, how did I let that creep in? How did that trauma come through into my mothering? And it is, I agree with you, this whole notion of, can we forgive? Should we forgive?
Yeah.
What does it mean to forgive?
Yes. It doesn't mean they get away with what they did and that there weren't consequences and they didn't need to be held accountable. But for me, and for me to be able to move forward, it's letting go,
Yeah.
So,
And which leads me back to the question I asked before about the fear of the altars, of going, well, if you let go, what does that mean for me? Like, this is my job. So what does that mean for me,
Well, my therapist, the couple of times when he's talked to a few of them, as he's tried to get them to go, well, that was your job back then. But maybe now, instead of being fearful that someone's going to come walk in the door and is going to abuse you, maybe you could get some coloring paper and do some drawing, or you can read a book and do all this sort of stuff. So he's trying to give them different focuses and realize that there is more to life. It is not easy because they're just so entwined in that. But there's been a couple of them that have actually, they get it, and they're living much more settled lives. They're still inside me. They haven't gone away, but they are content, understanding that what happened to them is in the past and their life can be different now. And they do probably vicariously more. They experience the good stuff with me, which helps buoy their days.
Yeah, wow, amazing. And That's so beautiful. I really like that. I think that that's the thing. It's about coexisting in a healthier way, right?
Yeah, yeah,
As much as possible. And,
yes,
I was gonna so, your kids, like, because they are young adults, how are they
yes.
feeling about the book? Do they how do they feel about Split? And also, how are they feeling about the upcoming manuscript?
Um, they have been amazing, quite honestly. Um, I have, as they've grown up, tried to give them age appropriate information regarding my background because they go, we see dad's parents, we're your parents. And so I've talked to them about that. But I like came a point early last year when I realized that Split was going to be a reality that I was like, I probably need, and it's going out on socials. And you know how teenagers, they friend everybody that they can. So I'm social friends with a lot of their friends. And it's like, which is weird, but that's okay. And I was like, if I put something out there on my socials about this, what's going to happen with the boys? I don't want them to be blindsided, especially the boys. I told the boys separate to my daughter. So I took them out. We went and we had fish and chips and we talked about it. And at the end of the day, they basically just said, Mom, we know who you are. And I don't really, their words, they said almost in unison when I said, what are you going to do if your friends say that you have a crazy mother? And they both almost in unison said, we tell them to F off.
I love that.
Uh, and
I
it's like,
love
I
that.
mean, and they're 17 and 19 and they're testosterone driven young men, but they're gorgeous and they've been so loving and so caring. And um, uh, it's been great. I appeared on the project and I wasn't here for that. And the boys actually had some of their mates over and had a watch party. It was like, oh, good grief, it was just so cool. And they've been really good. And my daughter's been fabulous as well. The circumstances, she doesn't live at home. So I took her out and we had sushi and we talked about it. And she's just been so supportive. She wrote a note. She said, I keep this on my desk now because I just found it in my cupboard. She said, I love you, Mom. You were so amazing. Your story and how far you've come. I'm so proud of you. She just left that on a note in my writing cupboard. And I was like, so she's my social media guru. When you see something good that's been done on social media, it's because my daughter's put it together. So,
oh my gosh, we all need a social media guru in our lives.
don't we though?
Yeah, far out. I love that. And I love that you were getting so much media attention for Split. I want to know, how did it feel when you first got that book in print in your hands?
It was surreal. Yeah, and it's what everybody goes through. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have the words, which is unusual for me. It was a dream come true. And I knew that it was the start of a journey, and I think that's the way writers feel. It's like, now that you've got it in hand, the journey to get it to publication. And, some people do traditional and some people do indie publishing. And so I chose the indie route, but it's still the same feeling going, okay, I've got this baby in my hand. Now what am I going to do with it? And for me, it was just the most amazing feeling to realize this is actually the start of a journey. I may be 60 plus, but the next 10 years of my life, because I've got 4 books I know that I want to write, and I'm going, the next, 10 years of my life are really going to be about how am I going to use this to change the narrative? And it's like, this is the start. I was so excited. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I don't often get to put it into words, so thank you.
You're welcome. But I think, like, one of the things I know from talking to so many amazing writers and authors is that it's a hard graft. It's not an easy thing, and especially for women who write memoirs, men as well. But I speak to women, so people who write memoirs, it's even harder because it's your truth and your narrative. And, if you ask 5 people about what just happened at a car crash, they'll all have a different version of events. But
absolutely.
It's right. So your truth is always your truth. And your story is so extraordinary. And such an extraordinary story of survival.
Thank you.
And I love that. And I think that, you are an amazing person, Maggie.
Me and the girls.
You and the girls.
Yes.
Maggie,
Yeah.
you and your girls, amazing.
you.
And I'm really grateful that you've come on here and shared this journey for this little amount of time that we've got. And I've just loved meeting you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being so open and brilliant about, multiple personality disorder, DID,
Yep.
and helping other people to understand it. And
that's the goal. That's the goal. Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I tell you what, I've said this to a couple of people that I've spoken to, but only a couple, that I really, really could see this ending up as like it'll end up like a television series or a Netflix special, or it'll be something. But I also see a TED Talk coming on, Maggie. And
well, I would love to do some TED Talks. One of the funny things for me is understanding that I actually have an ability to talk to people. And I don't think I realized that. And a couple people who've seen me do stuff have kind of gone, you actually have a presence and you can talk.
do.
I would love to do TED Talks. The concept of a TV series or a Netflix movie is interesting because I am vehemently opposed to it because of the stereotype.
Right.
I don't know, how they could tell the story because they want to sensationalize things. And that's one of the things that I've always hated is, When Rabbit Howls, Sybil, all these other stories, they make these characters out, and people with MPD to actually be villains. A lot of times, they're evil alters who are out to get vengeance and justice for things. And they make it really dark. And I'm going, I don't want that. I was doing a library talk in Port Macquarie, and the guy asked me the same question. And I didn't realize that he was a screenplay writer. I heard about this later. But he said, would you ever do a musical?
Oh.
And I just went,
wow, hang on.
Actually, I don't mind that idea because, first of all, with a musical, there's a certain lightness to it.
Yes.
And you could actually have some fun with it. So I'd probably be open to something like that if the right thing came along.
Do you know what, though? When we talk about darkness and things with like Netflix series, and we keep talking about Netflix, it could be anyone, could be Prime, could be
absolutely
anyone.
Yeah.
But I think the British are really good at doing these amazing treatments where there's lightness and comedy and a bit of humor.
There's still a serious subject matter, but I would be open to anything that brings on conversation and not judgment. That's actually, I'm glad I put it that way. Because when you see some of these shows, they're very judgmental. They're very black and white about how these characters are. And it's all about how sensational can we make it.
Yeah.
Versus how can it bring understanding and compassion and thoughtfulness and kindness. If somebody came to me and said they wanted to do something like that, I would have a completely different perspective.
Yeah, of course. And I agree. I think that, there's a sense of humor that you have, which is really beautiful that you've brought into this conversation today.
Thank you.
That comes through in your writing as well.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's a very, very, and in no way sitting here having this conversation am I trying to make light of this either.
No, I understand that.
But this is your life. And this is, you and the girls coexisting and having a pretty lovely life right now, and I'm thrilled for you. So thank you so much for coming on and letting my listeners meet you. And super excited, Maggie.
Cool, thank you.
I will. Everybody, if you want to know more about Maggie, go onto her website. It is Maggie -walters.com, and we will put it in the show notes, and we'll let everyone know where they can buy this book, Maggie, because it's amazing.
That'd be great. Thanks.
The book is split, and I can't wait. I'm sure that you'll be back on once the second manuscript comes out.
Perfect. I love it.
And I can't wait to meet you when you're in Melbourne, and I think you're brilliant. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening along to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm really thrilled and excited that the Good Girl Confessional podcast is part of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, a platform we created for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond to share their hard-won wisdom and to learn more information about the things that matter to us as women, midlife and beyond. Now, wherever you're listening to this podcast, I would be hugely grateful if you can follow, like and subscribe, because it helps the algorithm to actually reach more like-minded women. And they will realise that they're not alone in their journey, that's for sure. You might also like to know that we're over on YouTube. Join us there, The Good Girl Confessional. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as both The Good Girl Confessional and Women Beyond 40. And we're over on TikTok under Women Beyond 40. I would also like to thank the editor and producer of the podcast, Michael Smedley. As always, what a brilliant person. And thank you so much for listening along. I love you. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon.